Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's National Sewing Circle question and answer. So we are here to chat all things sewing, and before I officially introduce Nicki here, who's with me, she could give us a quick wave. I've got a few things to remind you all about. So my name is Leah. I'm your moderator for today's event, and I want to draw your attention to the link in the description. So if you look in the description of today's video, you'll find a link there to some free patterns. We would love you to have access to those. So go ahead and click that and get access to those free patterns at any point today, or if you come back and review this video later. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the chat box. So if you haven't already found the chat box, that's where you're going to drop all of your questions for this question and answer session so that Nicki can get to as many as possible in the time that we have together. That is going to be available for you right now. So even if you don't have a question yet, if you just want to drop a hello, let us know where it is that you're catching this from. We always love to see how far spread our community is when we do these live events. So with that said, it's time to bring Nicki on. Nicki, welcome. I'm going to give you the floor so you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your sewing history, and then also today, start us out with a little bit of some projects that you're working on right now.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Nicki LaFoille, and I've been sewing for about 20 years now. Starting out very, very small with hand sewing projects until my grandmother very graciously taught me to use her old Singer sewing machine. Garment sewing is my area of interest, but I sew all kinds of different things whenever the need arises, home deck and all kinds of stuff. But I do love sewing garments. I love using knit fabrics to sew garments. So if you have any questions about that, please do send those questions in to me. I love working with in the pattern stage of garment development. So I like to do a lot of pattern alterations. With my patterns, I like to take a basic building block pattern and do all kinds of fun stuff to it to make that pattern exactly what I want it to be. So I got a degree in apparel design, and I went on to work for Sew News, Sew It All, and Creative Machine Embroidery magazines. I was actually a guest on Sew It All TV for one episode, if you ever saw Sew It All TV on PBS. So I have a lot of experience in a wide range of sewing projects, and my most recent sewing project, of course, was sewing my daughter's Halloween costume. She was Avatar Korra from the TV series Legend of Korra. So that was really fun for us to work on together. She's getting very excited to learn how to sew, so it's a fun thing for us to do together. And I'm right now working on making some hats out of some knit fabric. That's going to be a gold live event. If you're a gold member, you can check that out on the 15th. So that'll be a fun one. And of course, it's getting cold here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So a nice knit hat, or knit fabric hat, not actually knitting. A knit fabric hat is a great project. It's been fun for me to sew up a whole bunch out of some different knit fabrics. And I had this on, it's my knit scarf. I took it off just before we went live, but because it's cold here, it's kind of cold in my house right now. So this circle scarf that I made a while back has been around my neck quite a bit lately. Circle scarves are a great sewing project for beginners, for kids. So those are a great project, and for this time of year too, of course. So that's what I have been working on. So I'm looking forward to seeing what questions everyone has today.
Yes, we have some hellos that have already popped in, Nicki. So we've got hello from Michigan, a fellow Michigander. Hello from Illinois. Welcome to all of our viewers. Again, if you missed the top of the hour when we first got started, check out the chat box. That's where you're going to drop all of your questions for Nicki. We're talking sewing for this entire Q&A session that we have. And we're going to drop into our first question right off the bat here from Kayla. So Kayla wants to ask, I have an old sweater and I've been turning it into a hat. Do you have any advice on making sure that it does not fray?
Yes, so that is an awesome project, taking an old sweater that you don't wear as a sweater anymore and reclaiming that wonderful knit fabric. So Sometimes the knit fabric is, if it's like a big chunky kind of looser knit fabric, as soon as you cut it, it may start to unravel. So I would say, and I mean, once you make your seam in that hat, that seam line is, the fraying will stop at the seam line, but you want to preserve that seam allowance, because once the fraying gets to the seam line, it weakens the seam and it just creates something that is a little bit not super strong and kind of iffy. So you do want to preserve those seam allowances. So once you cut out your hat shapes, I would say go ahead and zip a line of zigzag stitching, or if you have a serger, you can serge finish those raw edges to make sure none of those seam allowances are going to fray. And when you if you don't have a serger, if you want to zigzag stitch those edges to kind of lock in those raw edges and make sure it doesn't fray, you don't need to zigzag stitch directly on the edge, because sometimes, depending on your fabric, it might not work real well to zigzag stitch directly on the edge. You might get that knit fabric pushing down into your throat plate, or you may just get some stretching out of the fabric, which we don't want either. You can bump in a little bit from the exact raw edge of the fabric. And just having that line of zigzag stitches there is going to lock in that knit construction of the fabric and make sure it doesn't fray. So I would say finish those raw edges before you handle that fabric too much.
All right, we've got another question that comes in from Hera. Pardon me. Hera asks, "Hi, I'm new to sewing and I downloaded and started out making my very first project." Hera, that's so exciting. Congratulations for getting started. So Hera's problem is, I have no idea what the long lines on my skirt pattern are. I thought they were inverted pleats, but I'm not sure. Are they sizing? Reading patterns is difficult for a newbie. What do you think?
Yeah, reading patterns can kind of be overwhelming when you're starting out, because there's so many different lines and dots and shapes, and then there's straight, there's solid lines and there's dotted lines. So take your time and read through your pattern instructions. So there should be instructions that come in the pattern that are sewing instructions, but on the first page, there should be a key that tells you what the different symbols mean. So take a look at that. And on the pattern companies, a lot of them are different too. So sometimes the pattern companies like Berta patterns, I don't believe they have seam allowances on them. So you do have to pay attention sometimes to the instructions to say, because the instructions will say if you need to add seam allowances, but I think they're the only one that doesn't have seam allowances added. So most of the big pattern companies, Vogue, Simplicity, Butterick, will have the seam allowances on there for you, and they will have that key to tell you what those different lines mean. And they also will have the different size lines marked. So if you bought a pattern that is size range 4 to 10 or something, you'll have 4, 6, 8, and 10 marked on the line, so you know which line is which size. And the size lines will often be differentiated. So if size line 4 is a solid line, size line 6 will often be a dashed line, or 2 dashes and a dot or something. 2 dashes, dot, 2 dashes, dot, to kind of differentiate. Because when you get up to like curved areas like an arm's eye, the lines will cross over each other a lot of times. So, and when you get all those lines like right next to each other, it's kind of hard to see which is which. So they differentiate those size lines a lot of times. But yeah, I would say take your time to read the pattern. And also on the pattern envelope front, there should be either a picture of a finished garment or a line drawing of the finished garment, and you'll be able to see there if there are any pleats on the skirt that should be marked on the pattern as well. So take your time with that, and Yeah, try not to get frustrated. I know it's a lot of information that seems kind of overwhelming at first, but take your time and stick with it.
Good luck. I hope that helps a lot for you there. I know we get a lot of questions from beginners, so I know that you are not alone as well. Let's move on to our next question coming in from Jan. Jan wants to know, when using temporary spray to baste a quilt sandwich, do I spray the batting or the fabric, or does it not matter?
So for spraying a temporary spray adhesive, so full disclosure, I am not a huge quilter. I've never made like a full-size quilt. I've made smaller quilted things like a quilted pot holder, but nothing like real big that I needed temporary spray adhesive for. But that being said, um, I have experience, talking about quilting with Ashley Huff because she's, a big quilter. So we would do these together. And was talking with Colleen Talkie, who is a big quilter and works the National Sewing Circle, or National Quilter Circle, rather. So I would say, just to be safe, in most cases, I don't think it matters. But I would say it makes more sense and to just eliminate the chance of spraying that temporary spray adhesive on the wrong side of your quilt top. Like I think there's a very slight chance that that might bleed through, and so I would say to spray on the batting, because when you're making your quilt sandwich, I think it makes sense that you would have your backing and your batting laid down, and it makes sense you spray that and then lay your top wrong side down onto your quilt sandwich. So that is how I would do it. That's how it makes sense to me. And it seems like, even though the chance is very, very small, that if you spray that spray adhesive on fabric, it might, bleed through. And if you get a little too close to the fabric, spray a little bit too much, it might bleed through. Even though that chance is small, I'd say to eliminate that chance altogether, spray onto your batting.
All right, we've got some more hellos coming into our chat box, aside from just questions from all over. So we've got some more states in the United States. We've got Arizona, but we also have South Africa, Scotland, and Canada. So welcome to everybody that is joining us live. We're getting to as many questions as we can. So drop those into the chat box, as well as keep the hellos coming. Maybe if you've got a sewing project that you're working on as we're moving into the change of seasons, drop that in there as well. Let us know what you have rolling on your sewing machines, and ask your questions, of course, for Nicki as we go through. With that said, we're moving on to Tiny's question. So Tiny wants to know, clean project scrap hoarding is a problem for me that I don't want. I need help with knowing what to do to discard and how to do it. So what do you think about something like that?
So I know it's really, really hard to throw away scraps. Like if you have a chunk of fabric that's like this big, oh man, especially if it's a fabric that is beautiful, a really cool print or something, it can be hard to throw those away. My mother-in-law is an avid quilter, and I know she has a basket, just like a wicker basket in her sewing room, that is scraps. And I know sometimes when my daughter is over at her house, they will go through the scrap bin and find fabrics and piece together just a little doll blanket or whatever. So you can use those scraps, just cut them. You can cut them to a uniform size and piece them together. I know Tara Rex did a video on a scrappy, I think it was like a rice filled like warmer, but she did it with scraps. So she pieced together a whole bunch of scraps and then trimmed off the edges to make it the size that she needed, and then you have a big piece of fabric that you can use for more things than you could use this tiny little scrap for. So probably doesn't help the scrap hoarding problem. That might just encourage you to save more scraps, but there are things that you can do with those scraps. For me, I do save some amount of scraps, but I use a lot of scraps for stuffing things. So if you are making pin cushions or little like stuffed ornaments, stuffed toys. If you're making little, felt toys for kids that just need a little bit of stuffing, fabric scraps are great for that. But also, there comes a point when you have to decide what is worth the space in your sewing room, scraps versus something else, or scraps versus just some neat, clean, tidy space that a lot of people I talk to say when they're in a cluttered environment, it makes it hard to focus. It makes it hard to focus on whatever you're doing, if it's office work or if it's creative work like we do in our sewing rooms. So having a neat and tidy space can be super helpful. So you have to kind of decide, am I going to use this scrap of fabric, or is it worth it to just toss it? So there's pros and cons, and it comes down to if you're willing to piece those scraps together to make yourself a bigger chunk of fabric to do something with. There's the paper piecing method in quilting that uses a lot of times small scraps. So if you are into that or want to learn about that, it's another way you can maybe use some scraps up as well.
Now, a follow on, if you are going to conjoin those scraps and make that larger piece of fabric like you talked about, what stitch would you recommend for that?
I think you can just use just a straight stitch, and you can, as you're piecing those scraps together, you can give yourself a nice, you can cut a nice straight line to stitch those pieces together, or you can kind of, eyeball it as you're stitching them together. And then when you get a line of them, trim off the edges. And so you have, a long strip, and then just keep going with the strips, kind of like a strip method. So, but I think just regular old straight stitch is good for piecing things together. And you can, if you have a whole bunch of scraps, you can just kind of piece them all, keep piecing them, chain piecing. Boy, that's the word I'm looking for. So chain piecing is when you backstitch at the end of the seam, but you don't need to cut the thread in between your next seam that you're going to sew. Just line it right up under the foot, right behind the piece that you already stitched. So you can just buzz through a whole bunch and then cut them apart after the fact. That kind of makes things go a little quicker sometimes if you have a whole bunch of scraps to piece together.
We'll stay on this scrap topic for just one more comment here. This comes in from Marta as a suggestion. So Marta says that Marta saves scraps and gives them to a quilter for dog beds. So would you like to elaborate on maybe where you could donate some of those scraps for something like that?
That is awesome, Marta. And I think that is super great. It depends on if that's available in your community. So if you are part of a sewing group in your community, quilting group in your community, if they have meetups or a Facebook page, or you can go to your fabric store if you have a local fabric store and inquire there if there's anyone who might be able to use your scraps for something. So I think that's a great idea, searching out someone, to donate them to who might be able to make use of your scraps. I think that's great.
All right, and we can crowdsource that in the comments as well. So if you have ever shipped off your scraps to somewhere and you want to share, go ahead and drop that in the comments too. Keep an eye on the chat box. Even if you don't have questions, our community is really good about crowdsourcing some of these questions. With that said, we're going to go to Kelsey's question next. Kelsey wants to know, is it possible to ensure a good fit when you don't have a dress form or somebody to help you in the fitting process?
Yes, there are things that you can do to help, edge yourself toward a good fit at each stage of the process. There will probably still be some adjustments that you might need to do as you're, making if you have time to make a mock-up. That's always a great idea, but let's go back to the pattern stage first. So to ensure a good fit, if you don't have a dress form, I don't have a dress form. So it's definitely possible. You do not need a dress form. Dress form can be super helpful, but you can start at the pattern stage. So you have your pattern, and of course you choose the size lines to cut on that most closely match your measurements from the chart on the back of the pattern envelope. And quick note there, you do want to choose the size line that most closely matches your bust measurement, because that is the most challenging area to make adjustments to, because you've got curves, you've got a lot of times some shaping, darts going on, and it's a lot easier to take in or let out the waistline and the shoulder line in those areas. So choose the size line that fits best for you. It's also really easy to blend between size lines. Say you are a size 10 in the bust and a size 8 down by the waist. Really, all you need to do is kind of blend between those sizes. So go from your size 8 or your size 10, whatever it was that I said, and just use a pencil and gradually connect the size 10 to the size 8 line down by the waist. So that's an easy way to edge toward a closer fit before you even cut out the fabric. You can also measure the pattern to double check that it's going to fit around your body the way that you want it to and the way the pattern is designed to. So you can measure that flat pattern, making sure you subtract out the seam allowances. If there are any darts, make sure you subtract those out of the measurement. But you can really just lay your ruler down along the pattern to measure that pattern as it, what the measurement will be when it is sewn up. So that's why we're subtracting out seam allowances and darts and those kinds of things, and measure it against your body to make sure it will fit you in the areas that matter. So circumference around the bust, waist, length. You can double check these things and make alterations to the pattern before you even cut your fabric out. Now, a mock-up is super duper helpful in tweaking the fit and getting the fit just right, especially if you're working with a fabric that's expensive, you don't have any extra fabric of, so you really want to make sure you don't make any mistakes. So if you make a mock-up first, you want to use a fabric that is similar to the end fabric that you're going to be using. So you know it's going to drape somewhat the same, so that you can get an idea of how it's going to fit and how it's going to look before you even cut out your garment fabric. So that mock-up can be super duper helpful, and you don't need to make a complete garment out of that mock-up. You can use a basting stitch for all of your stitches, and you can just do, like, if it's a shirt, you can just do the bodice portion. You don't necessarily need to do sleeves and collar and all of those design elements. But adding a sleeve on is helpful in determining the fit of the sleeve. So you might want to do the sleeve. But other design elements you're not going to need to do. You're not going to need to put the pocket on and all of these other things. Just the basic building blocks of that pattern, so you can see how it fits on you. Make adjustments to the mock-up, transfer that to the pattern, and then that pattern will be even closer to the perfect fit when you go to cut it out in your actual garment fabric. So yeah, you don't need a dress form if you just take your time and be kind of precise with measuring the pattern. Then yeah, you can get a really good fit the first time you cut out your garment fabric, and you won't need to make many adjustments to the garment fabric after you've cut it and stitched it. So
All right, good luck. We're going to move into the sewing machine for our next two questions. They both have to do with machines here. The first one coming in from Marie. Marie wants to know how you can reset the tension on your machine. Marie's granddaughter played with her machine and now the stitches are loose.
Okay. Yes, that's frustrating. You have your tension set perfectly and then it gets adjusted. So yes, so tension is something that can be very, very frustrating for people because it just makes it impossible to move forward. So if your stitches are too loose or if they're too tight and you're getting puckering, it's really frustrating. So when you go to adjust your tension, here's what I always tell people. Adjust in small increments. So don't go from a 3 to a 4, go from a 3 to a 3.5. Stitch a couple stitches, take a look at it, and then adjust from there. Because you can swing wildly, and a lot of times you don't need huge adjustments. In this case, you might if somebody turned the dial all the way. But normally you want to go small increments. And also you can thread your needle with a thread that is in high contrast to your bobbin thread and also in high contrast to the fabric you're stitching on so that you can really get a good visual as to what's going on and how those threads are connecting, where they're connecting, so you know how to adjust. So you want to also use a fabric to test your tension. Use a fabric that you use a lot. So if you stitch on cotton a lot, just grab yourself a double layer of cotton to test your stitching on. Yeah, so to get back to the tension that you want, a lot of times machines will give you a nice mid-range too. So my tension goes from 0 to 9. And on my dial, between 3 and 5, they tell me that is a good range to be in. And normally that is where I sit, between 3 and a 5. Depending on the thickness of fabric I'm sewing, I might go up to 5 or I might go down to 3, but normally I stay right there. So you can start somewhere in the middle and set that as your starting point and test, and then go from there. So just go in small increments. Also, let me go back to basics real quick. If you do a test stitch and you're getting loops on the wrong side of the fabric, it means your tension is too loose. You need to tighten that fabric up, raise the number, so making that needle tension stronger so that the needle thread pulls up harder and pulls that loop that's getting made under here, pulls that loop up harder so that it will meet in the middle of the stitch, in the middle of the fabric. Conversely, if you're getting a loop on the upper side of the fabric, that means your needle tension is too strong. So decrease that. If it's too strong, it's pulling that bobbin thread up too hard, too strong, and making that loop on the right side, the face of the fabric. So decrease that tension so it's not pulling up so hard, and it will sit more in the middle. Very, very rarely will you need to make an adjustment to your bobbin tension. And it seems like in this case, you won't. If she just, cranked on the needle tension dial, that'll be all you need to mess with, to adjust, to get it back to where you want it to be. So good luck.
Yes. Cece's got our next question about sewing machines. So Cece says, I wanted to make outdoor furniture cushion covers. My concern is, will the weight of the fabric break the machine needle? I have never used a sewing machine and I wonder if this might be more than I can tackle. What do you think?
Well, I don't sell yourself short, Cece.
Right.
I don't think this is anything more than you can tackle. It is it's a step up from where most beginners start, but I don't think I don't think it's impossible. It's definitely doable. I don't think it will break your machine needle. you might want to consider going to a needle that is a little bit larger. So your universal needles, if I can find a packet here. So needles come in different sizes. So this is like there's a bunch of different kinds in here, but universal needle, so on this side here. So I have a bunch of different sizes here. They go from size 60/8, I think, up to 110/something. So the higher the number, the thicker the needle will be. So it will, if you're using a fine fabric, you want a smaller needle so it's not going to punch a huge hole in your fabric. But if you are using a heavyweight, densely woven fabric, you want a needle that is a little bit larger so it can handle that. So I would say go with a size 90/14 needle, or even a size 100 needle. But a size 90/14 is a good place to start. If you have any like leather or jeans needles lying around, maybe you don't if you're a beginner, but those are also reinforced blades to handle, a dense denim or a dense leather fabric. So those are also options. But I would say go for it and go slow. But I think you can definitely do it.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to our next question. Comes in from Frankie. And Nicki, I'm going to have you answer this, but also I think this is a good one. If anybody out there watching wants to drop your own answer into the chat box, this would be a good crowdsource one too, I think. So Frankie is saying, feeling very discouraged about my sewing skills and capabilities. How do you keep yourself enthusiastic when you are in a sewing/creative rut? I haven't had a successful sewing project in so long. So Nicki, what do you say to Frankie?
Well, I have been there. And I think a lot of people who've been sewing for a long time have been there, where you don't feel like sewing anything. You're in that rut. So for me, taking a trip to the fabric store and looking at beautiful fabric always gets me excited for making something. So choosing a beautiful fabric that you're excited about working with is a great way to just get back into it. But also, if you are discouraged about your capabilities and having a hard time having success in your projects, I would suggest taking a step back and go back to the basics. Make a pillowcase, or just something that has straight lines, straight seams, and something that you are sure to have success with and are sure to get a finished product that you're excited about, that is useful and beautiful. So beautiful fabric is key. But yeah, just taking a step back, and don't push it, don't challenge yourself too much, so you can build your confidence back up. So a pillowcase, as I mentioned, is a good one. Just a little tote bag is great too, because those are, it's a square or a rectangle with some handles. You can use it in your day-to-day life and have something that has, beautiful fabric of your own choosing that nobody else is going to have. So that's very exciting. And like a scarf is a great one too, because you can wear it and really show off those cute fabrics.
Oh, this is a good lead into our next question. It comes in from Lorna, and Lorna's wondering, this scarf that you just pointed out, is there a video to make the scarf that you are wearing right now?
I believe there is. I believe this was a Facebook Live that I did, I think. But I know I did it for a video. So I don't know if it's on the National Sewing Circle Facebook page or if it's on the National Sewing Circle YouTube site. I'm not sure. But yeah, I did this scarf for National Sewing Circle, and it's reversible. So you have some you have options on how you want to wear it. I have a solid here and a flannel here. So yeah, I did a video on it, and I talked about how to do it in different fabrics too. If you wanted to do it in something heavier weight um, for more winter time, or if you wanted to do it in something lighter weight for a nice summer scarf. And I talk about doing it in different widths. So yeah, you can check that out. Look on, like I said, I'm not sure exactly where it is, but can dig a little bit for it. But I did make a video on it.
All right, fantastic. We'll see if maybe we can get a link into that at some point today. We'll
Yeah.
check and see. Let's go on to another question about needles. This is pretty specific coming in from Carol. So what is a good needle to use for 2 layers of cotton and 2 layers of batting? So Carol's keep breaking at the moment. What do you think?
Oh, so 2 layers of cotton and 2 layers of batting. So I think so. A universal needle should be good for those fabric types. It might be a size issue that you are dealing with, or well, if they keep breaking, I was going to say a dull needle is more likely to break. So make sure you're using a new needle. But if your needle is having trouble going through those layers, I would say try going up a size and see, because you want to make sure that needle is going to go through your layers, but you also don't want it to punch too big of a hole through your fabric. But I think if you try going up a size. So if you're using a size 80/12 universal needle, try going up to a size 90/14. And if that works, but it makes too big of a hole in your fabric, you can try going to a leather needle, because a leather needle has a nice strong reinforced shaft. A leather needle also has a really sharp chisel tip to punch through leather fabrics. So maybe might be kind of overkill for 2 layers of cotton and 2 layers of batting, but I want to give you some options just in case a larger size universal needle doesn't work. I also mentioned a jeans needle a little bit earlier. Those are nice strong needles as well, designed for going through a lot of layers of denim fabric when you're making jeans. But a jeans needle can be used in this case too if you're having trouble with needles breaking in whatever fabric you're using. You can try a jeans needle as well. So give some of those a try, and hopefully that will alleviate the needle breakage problem. Sometimes too, I recently learned that when you are free motion stitching, sometimes you'll get broken needles if you move the fabric when the needle is down in the fabric, because obviously the needle's down in the fabric and you try to move the fabric, it's going to put stress on the needle, possibly break the thread, possibly break the needle. So if that is the situation here, make sure you're not moving the fabric when the needle is down. But in general, I would say maybe try a different size needle.
Okay, and I knew it. Our team behind the scenes is always on top of it. So that tutorial that Nicki did about the scarf is linked in the chat box. So please go ahead and click that link and you will find your way to the tutorial that Nicki did for the scarf that she was wearing earlier. So that'll be great. Our team, thank you. A round of applause. They're always on top of it. And then before we get into a few more questions, we've got a little bit of time to get through some. I did want to slide in that I know that this is creating gifts for gift giving season. And Nicki, I wanted to see if you would talk a little bit about any kind of timing considerations that any of our viewers should be thinking of, either sourcing some materials or what kind of project might be a little too late to start at this point, or what might be really great if you're in the last week and you want something quick that you want to add to a stocking stuffer, anything like that. If you wanted to talk a little bit about coming up into this gift giving season.
Yes. So this has been a concern recently, is shipping times
Mm-hmm.
and shortages of things, which is a concern for like ordering Christmas gifts, but also ordering fabric for making your Christmas gifts. So if you are ordering fabric the sooner the better, because shipping times are all over the place these days, it seems. So get those fabric orders in, but also have a backup plan just in case that fabric doesn't get here. So projects that use fabrics from your stash are a really nice thing. Fabrics that or projects that don't use a lot of fabric are great too. So little scrappy projects. Um, you can check out the free patterns that Leah was talking about earlier. Those have the free patterns page has a lot of cute projects that don't take a lot of fabric. So little scrap buster, stash buster projects are great for if your fabric order doesn't come in time, or if you're just down to the wire and trying to make gifts for people in the last week. Those little projects are really great. You can even do making little gift bags for whatever other little gift that you're giving. So just that, like the packaging of things too, can be a cute way to add that type of personalization that you're looking for in creating a project for someone, without necessarily having to make the entire gift and everything. So making like a little gift bag or a little fabric box that you can then wrap up some other little gift in. So yes, that's definitely a consideration that should be on your mind if you're wanting to order fabric. So definitely think about that for your project making, gift giving.
All right, I did want to slide that in. It was something that we talked about in a different Q&A that I think took place last week or a week before. And I feel like sewers, you might want to think about it as well. So thank you for covering that for us. We've got a question from Johnny next. So Johnny says, I made a wonderful cross stitch and I want to put it on my sweater. In the future, should I make it on the piece of fabric before or after constructing the garment?
So that all depends. I don't think there's anything wrong with creating your cross stitch and then putting it onto a garment as like a little patch. If it's small, you can go on a patch like in the pocket, make it into a pocket even, or just in the pocket area. Or if it's bigger, either making it, square, rectangular shaped, or even rounding off the corners and appliquing the edges onto a garment so you have that cross stitch as like a big patch. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but if it's possible, if you're able to cross stitch directly on it, that's totally something you can do as well. It just depends on the type of look that you're going for, and um, what you are, if you're okay with that patch look rather than the embroidering being directly on the garment. So I think that's sewist's choice. It's up to you.
All right, and let us know how it goes. If you try it, come back and let us know. We're going to go to Carlota's question next. Apologies, Carlotta. Hello, I am new on sewing machines. I always did my dresses by hand. I have tried to do it on the machine, but my thread gets all bulky underneath. What might be going wrong here?
Well, super impressive that you were doing dresses by hand.
Right?
Really impressed. But yeah, learning to use a sewing machine can make things a lot faster and easier. Well, easier if everything goes right. So, if you're getting bulky threads underneath, that tells me it might be a tension issue, an issue with your needle tension. So, it's this weird thing where if you're getting thread nests on the underside of the fabric, a lot of times it is something to do with the needle thread and not the bobbin thread. Conversely, maybe doesn't make sense when you think of it right away, but that is usually what the issue is. Or you might be just needing a new needle. Sometimes that needle dulls a little bit faster than you were expecting and creates these tension issues. Sometimes a needle, if you nick a pin or something, it'll get a little nick in it or a burr on it, and it'll create all kinds of tension issues as well. So I would say try a new needle. Do make sure you're using the right size needle for the thread that you're using. So if you're using a thread that is a little bit heavier weight or thicker, you're going to need a needle that has a larger size eye. Because if you're trying to put a thick thread through a small needle eye, that's everywhere the needle or everywhere the thread touches something, it adds tension to that thread. So if that thick thread is trying to go through a small needle eye, it's creating a lot of friction, it's adding more tension to that thread. You're going to get a whole host of issues. If you're using just a regular all-purpose thread, that's probably not the issue. An all-purpose thread is great when used with a universal needle of mostly any size. I would say you can play around with your tension settings a little bit after you change out your needle. Make sure you're using a sharp needle of the right type and size. Make sure your thread path is clear of debris, lint, dust, because that can also add tension to the thread. If there's a whole bunch of dust in between the tension plates, it gunks up the entire system. So clean out your machine. It's a good idea to do it once or twice a year, more if you're using a lot of fabric that releases a lot of lint and dust, like fleeces, flannels. So cleaning out under your throat plate, between your tension discs. Once you're sure everything is clear, then you can start playing with your tension settings. And like I was talking about a little bit earlier, adjust your tension in small increments, half increments, and stitch a sample, see how it worked, and then go another half increment if you need to. If you're still having issues, you can possibly adjust your bobbin tension too. You can check your machine manual. Some manuals don't tell you how to do it because they don't really want you doing it, because it can be kind of a finicky adjustment and they would rather you take it to the sewing machine dealer to have that done. But there's a little screw if you have the bobbin, the little metal bobbin case that then gets inserted in your machine. There's a little screw. Do that in itsy bitsy teeny tiny increments if you're going to venture into adjusting your bobbin tension. Take a permanent marker and mark where that screw points so that you know where the factory setting is before you take it in a quarter turn increment. So hopefully one of those steps on that checklist will help alleviate that bulky thread on the underneath of your fabric.
Right. Hopefully all of that helps. Making that change has got to be something. We're going to stay on machines here with our next question. I'm going to try to say this name correctly. It's Aish Varia. And we're wondering if you would talk about your machine that you have. So what is your machine and what would be your suggestion for a good machine for somebody that's looking one for themselves?
I would love to talk about my machine because I love my machine. This is a FOF Passport 2.0. I have sewn on a lot of FOFs. When I worked for Sew News Magazine, we had our sewing room that had a whole bunch of different machine manufacturers and types. And I actually sewed on a FOF embroidery machine a lot. We had a bunch of different embroidery machines, and that was always the one I went to because it made sense to me, because this type of machine, and of course FOF makes a range of machines, but I like the machines that are not super computerized. That is a personal preference. When Ashley Huff and I talk about this, she loves the computerized machines that will do everything for you, will choose the tension settings and sew for you basically with the push of a button. I like having manual control over what I'm doing so that if something goes wrong, I know exactly, maybe not exactly what it is, but where to look and what to change to figure out what is going wrong. So this machine has everything that I need as a garment sewer. It's got 70 built-in stitches, a whole bunch of decorative stitches. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 different buttonhole stitches, which is nice. But really, I use a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, and a triple stretch stitch most often. And this has, of course, all of those and many, many more. But this machine is just, it feels really sturdy to me. I had a couple of brother machines in the past and never really had any problem with them. I was a poor college kid, and the low level brother machines, $80, had all the stitches that I needed, but they felt very lightweight, which, I mean, at that price point makes sense. And this FOF, I think, runs in the maybe $700 or $800 range. I'm not exactly sure anymore. I've had this for several years. So obviously it's going to be made a little bit sturdier at that price point, but it's a very, very sturdy machine. I can sew through many, many layers. I was very, very surprised. I made a backpack out of like an upholstery fabric, and I sewed through like 6 layers of that, and also a couple of layers of faux leather when I was attaching, straps and stuff, and sewed through no problem. I love this. It's got the integrated dual feed foot behind it. It's this little black lever that comes down and hooks under the presser foot. It acts as a built-in walking foot, which I always leave it engaged whenever I can, because it just helps the fabric feed under the presser foot. So you got your feed dogs on the bottom layer of fabric grabbing and pulling it, and the walking foot under the presser foot does the same thing. It walks that upper layer of fabric along to keep it in line with the bottom layer of fabric. So I'm a huge fan of FOF. That's my 2 cents on that. But if you're in the market for a new machine, I always tell people it is always best to go get your hands on a machine if you possibly can. If you can sit at the machine, drive it, see how it feels, play around with the features, that's the best way to get a feel for the machine before you buy it. But you can also read reviews online if you have to buy online. Reviews are super important. So if you have bought a machine, I highly recommend leaving a review somewhere so that you can share your experiences with other sewists who are looking to buy that machine. You can also think about what direction you want to go in your sewing. If you know, if you're a beginner, you might not know yet, and that's fine. But there are some machines that are geared more toward garment sewers. Some machines are geared more toward quilters. So if you want to make projects like quilts that you're going to have a lot of bulk that you're trying to roll up and get through the machine, a bigger area here in the arm is super helpful. So a lot of times they will say those things in the descriptions of the machines, what features it has that gears towards certain types of sewing. So you can take that into consideration as well. You can talk to people, seamstresses in your life, and see if they have recommendations. But I do find people tend to have brand loyalty. If they grew up sewing on a singer, they might just love singers because that's maybe what they've had most experience on or good memories with, perhaps. So keep that in mind too. I'm sure I'm guilty of it too. I've been, in love with my FOF machine here. So that's just, I'm probably gonna, my next machine might be another FOF. Just because I've had such good experiences with this one. So keep that in mind when you're talking to people. Some people will say, oh, Bernina is the best. Don't get anything but a Bernina. But then, it's subjective. Everybody has their own opinions. So do your research. And again, get your hands on one if you can. I know it's kind of hard these days to get to a store and drive one, but it's always the best way.
All right, let's get two final questions in. I believe we have time for both of them. First one from Cece. Cece wants to know which book is best for beginners, and also adds she's enjoying all of the information and thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Cece. I'm glad to know I can be helpful in some way. So for beginners, there are a lot of resources out there. I know it can be overwhelming to know where to start. So I don't have a book per se that I can recommend, but the National Sewing Circle website is great for learning to sew because they have a whole bunch of little technique videos, but also project videos as well. And project videos ranging from the super simple beginner projects to, steps up. So you can kind of grow your skills too. And videos are really great for learning to sew if you can't be with a sewing instructor, because it's like, having a sewing instructor there instructing you, and you can see what is happening. Whereas sometimes sewing instructions in text is a little bit hard to visualize and understand what's going on. So videos are really great for learning because you can really see exactly what's going on. So National Sewing Circle is a great resource. Craftsy is also a really great resource. They have a huge library of sewing videos, also quilting videos too, if that's something you think you might get into in the future. But they have a ton of sewing videos, and the classes that they have on Craftsy they're pretty beefy. You can get a class that's an hour and a half, 2 hours long, but they break it into sections. Of course, you can come back to it. You can stop at a good stopping point and come back to it. And they have different camera angles. They have good zoom, so you can really zoom in on the needle and see what's going on. So some of those video library resources are really, really great, and highly recommended for beginners who might not have that base of knowledge yet to understand and visualize what's going on if you're just reading text.
All right, thank you for that information. And I'm going to let Taj bring us home with the question that you're going to answer. And then I'm also going to have you elaborate, Nikki. So first, Praj wants to know if you have any sew-alongs coming up for making dresses. And then I'll just have you tag on, since we're getting to the end of our time together. Let us know anything that you have coming up and where to find you, and any final thoughts that you have as well. So first, do you have any dress sew-alongs in the future?
I don't, but now you're making me think maybe I should. um, I do think I'm going to be filming some videos coming up. So maybe some garment videos are called for, because I have been doing a lot of small project videos. So I will keep that in mind. I don't have anything in the works right now, but definitely will keep that in mind. And if there are any projects that people are passionate about and want to see a video tutorial, type those in, because I'm always doing Facebook videos, and in these Q&As I can talk about some of those things too. So let me know what you are interested in. Like I said, I have a video on the 15th. If you're a gold member, we're making hats. But I have on the 23rd, I do believe I have another Facebook video. So if you haven't liked the National Sewing Circle Facebook page yet, give that a like so you can keep updated on what's happening on the National Sewing Circle Facebook page. So you can see me there. I'm there often. You can find me at I have a Amazon author page. So you can go on Amazon, you can search NL LaFoille, and I have an Amazon author page because I've written a couple of fiction novels. But on that page, it's also linked to a blog where I write about stuff I'm doing with my family. We do a lot of traveling, do a lot of gardening and canning, and cooking. So we're always coming up with something. So if you're interested in any of that, you can check out the blog. Otherwise, stay tuned on the National Sewing Circle Facebook page, and you're sure to see my face there.
Yes, indeed. So, with that said, we've reached the end of our time today. But of course, we want you to come back. We always do more of these, and they are a really big treasure trove of information. Nikki, there are a lot of thank yous that have dropped in throughout today's event. So, we're always learning a little bit of something together. If you haven't already, go ahead and scroll through the chat box. Our team has dropped a few links in, links to those free pattern designs that you can access. That's also in the description of the video as well. And then that tutorial that Nikki also mentioned, that is in your chat box in a link form so you can follow that. This is the end of our time, like I said today, but go check Nikki out at those places that she pointed out, and we will see you very shortly. So without anything else to say, we just have to say thank you. So we're going to send you on your way for all of your sewing fun, and we will see you the next time. Bye.